Our featured BBB Wise Giving Alliance accredited charity seal holders for this episode are Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Pure Water for the World, Resurge International. To find out more about these and other BBB Wise Giving Alliance accredited charity seal holders, go to give.org.
You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. You know, one of the things I often get asked at cocktail parties or just gatherings of people when they ask me what I do for a living is I say that I work for an organization that evaluates charities, and it helps people make informed giving decisions. And so a lot of times people will say, oh, so you're the person who will help me understand how much money a charity spends on overhead. And I say, well, yeah, we can tell you that, but that's not always the greatest metric to use when you evaluate the performance or trustworthiness of a charity. In fact, charities definitely need to spend money on administration and certainly need to spend money on fundraising. But you know, the conversation persists. We started something some years ago called the overhead myth, trying to help people better understand, you know, the issues associated with relying too heavily on simple financial ratios. And I did a whole podcast on charity finances some weeks ago, which you can check out. But I'm always still interested in charities keeping their costs low in the area of fundraising when it makes sense. And when there are tools and resources that they can use to lower their costs, I want to make sure they know about them. So lo and behold, something came across my desk here recently that is set up to do just that. And the gentleman who is my guest today, Greg Warner, started this company that is enabling charities to be a bit more effective, hopefully, in how they raise funds. So we're happy to have Greg Warner with us today on the Heart of Giving podcast. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the invite.
So Greg, first of all, give us a little bit of background on you and why you would even think to develop a tool that could help charities with their fundraising and messaging.
Sure. Well, I'm a serial entrepreneur who started learning about charitable giving as I earned more money. My family was not actually charitably inclined. They weren't philanthropists. I wasn't taught about that at a young age. As I started to make more money, I felt a desire to give back and gave to a variety of charities, still do, and volunteer, still do. But my wife is an insulin-dependent diabetic and has been since she was 9. She's had many complications, lost vision in one eye. I started giving more to a diabetes-related charity, and I found out some interesting things about becoming a donor and among them are that the more you give, the more they're likely to sell your name to other charities that will compete for the same dollars. And if you show up, if you have a big house and some other things, you'll show up on wealth screening as a target because you have capacity to give more. So that leads to some kinds of crass engagement experiences, even ambush solicitations that are uncomfortable. Some even direct mail. I've gotten a couple of 9x12 envelopes with a proposal and a letter asking me for $10,000 or more dollars. All in all, I guess what I'm saying is that I found that the giving experience in exchange for money, and every exchange of money requires an exchange of value. The giving experience is pretty old school and in need of an update, like a new operating system. So I took my experience as a larger donor and as a marketer and came up with a way to help nonprofits engage all supporters in a way that helps them feel like VIPs and helps the wealthiest among them lean into the philanthropic process rather than being targeted and speared, if you will. It's more about helping them lean in with a magnet to attract them because they can see that the value of the experience is worthwhile.
Great. Well, I just wanted to ask, was one of those $10,000 requests in a big envelope from the BBB Wise Giving?
No, it wasn't. I don't think I should tell you where it was from.
No.
But interestingly, one of the times was from an organization I had never engaged with in any way whatsoever.
Wow.
Which is, it just came out of the blue. And and this is what I'm talking about, is that if you're not engaged, and there's really three components to philanthropy if you really break it down. And if you take the reams of scientific research, you can break it all down to three things that people need to have. And that's, one is a life story intersection with the cause, like the hospital, somebody saved my mom's life, something like that. Or two is you have to share the same values. And that's easy to comprehend. Number three is the donor needs to have a desire for a sense of belonging. That might be from feeling that they belong to the community. Maybe it's as a volunteer, board member, whatever it is. But also it could be that they give, for instance, to the homeless shelter because it makes them feel like they're helping someone that could have been them. So they feel part of community and they feel that they belong in some way. This is how people find meaning through philanthropy, and that's the meaning is the exchange of value that they want in return for their money.
First of all, I completely agree, but let me also just say, I'm sorry about the struggles that your wife faces with diabetes, but we also hear very frequently that people, like you say, who engage in a cause do so because it hits them at home. And they immediately become motivated. And in fact, I give talks about what inspires us to give. And a lot of times it's a number of different things, but often it is the sense that it's either happened to me, somebody I know, or it could happen to me or somebody I know. And therefore, I want to make sure that they have the best opportunities as a result. So very good that you would mention it in that context. But let's talk about, now that you've had this observation about giving and also this experience that has been somewhat unseemly in some cases and certainly unpleasant, what have you done now to kind of help organizations avoid some of these situations with donors that they probably don't want to be in, but they don't quite understand how to do better?
Yeah, so I was running a marketing agency, and that's the business that I was involved in back in 2008. As I started making more money and giving more money, ran into this problem. I ended up calling the charity and found out that what they really wanted, because I was upset with the way they were marketing towards me, and found the person responsible, and she was very kind. And she said, you have to understand, we're short-staffed. We can't spend money. We have very tight budgets. And we hire these consultants that tell us what to do, and this is what they told us to do. And I said, okay, that I hear you. I have empathy for you, but is it working? And she said, no, not really. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll come up with a marketing strategy for you. I'll give it to you for free. You could do it yourself or do it with me. She ended up doing it with me. And the strategy was one that I used in the marketing agency for a highly considered decision. So there are relational decisions, more transactional and impulse-oriented decisions, which generate low dollar gifts or low dollar product purchases. And there are highly considered major giving decisions, or like a house or buying a car, investing in a big vacation, whatever it may be in the private sector. Most charities end up generating most of their money from 0.7% of their audience, their donors, I should even say. And in fact, 77% of all charitable giving from individuals comes from 0.7% of the donors. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't democratize giving and we shouldn't invite anybody or let anybody give, but the resources of an organization or institution are massively slanted towards sending out direct mail, printing, postage, event organization, bake sales, all these things that maybe deliver a 2-to-1 return on investment. So what I recommended and still do, and the software and system we developed, helps organizations engage with all their supporters, but in a way that delivers value to them, so they move themselves forward towards giving either a transactional impulse-oriented gift, which is low dollar, or they raise their hands saying that they have the kinds of assets and passion and values, life story intersection, desire for community and belonging, and the timing is right for them to engage in a philanthropic discussion with a philanthropy facilitator at the organization, so they can make a gift that will help them be the person they always wanted to be. So by doing this, by creating a marketing system that engages people and allows them to lean into the process, rather than spending so much money to target people and solicit them in a crass manner that's expensive and doesn't really deliver ROI, that's what we do. We do that with a 10-to-1 ROI guarantee, but our mission is to get every customer up to 100-to-1 return on investment.
Wow. That's pretty remarkable. And so far, you've had some success with this, I assume?
Well, it's been 16 years. Today is my 16-year anniversary, in fact.
Well, congratulations for 16
Thank you. You know, say that most businesses don't even make it 5 years or 1 year. And here we are 16 years later, and we have hundreds of customers on the system. They're subscribers. It's a subscription-based application. And many are signed up for multi-year contracts because they want to lock it in with inflation these days. But people are very committed. We built a nice tribe of believers in engagement and collaboration instead of solicitation.
So how does it work specifically? Give me more detail, because I'm really intrigued now.
Sure. Well, it begins with extending an offer to your supporter base to engage. The offer can come in many forms, but the one form that most people understand most, and we offer the variety, of course, but the one that works the best is to invite them to take a survey to provide feedback about the organization, its mission, how they're doing their job and such. Many people at first say to us, well, our wealthy donors or our donors will never fill out surveys and this and that. And it kind of just isn't true. It's not that it kind of isn't, it just isn't true. The long and short of it is that there's pent up demand among supporters for feedback loop. They're over solicited and they're tired of being asked for money. They want to be asked for advice and feedback. And there's an old saying that if you ask for money, you're likely to get feedback. But if you ask for feedback, you're likely to get money if you do it right.
Okay.
So we start the process by engaging with people to understand why all those components that I talked about earlier and what's in their heart, where that intersection really is. And it's very Socratic because then they start asking themselves questions, not only to reconnect their reason of why they care, but this survey asks them questions about what they might give and whether it would be cash or assets. And that's really the dividing line. Is a person with a cash giving mentality is very different from a person who has an asset giving mentality. And we're looking for the people who have assets to give and care about the cause. And then we invite them to tell us, is the timing right for you to consider a philanthropic exploration? And all of that combined creates a dossier of data that's much deeper and helps the donor opt in, because one of the questions is, do you want to opt in for follow-up engagement? And about 75 to 80% do. That's where the magic really happens, is then our system thinks about every supporter's answers to these questions, and it begins to send them automated cultivation emails that are engagement and value oriented. They never solicit, because if you solicit, you're basically driving them away, or you'll get a small gift rather than a true big gift of assets. So as they opt in for that and the system engages them automatically, which is what fundraisers normally have to do, but they can't do that for hundreds or thousands of people.
Right.
So now we let the system do that kind of cultivation work. And then the people who lean in even further and set up appointments on their own, so that they self-qualify or they set up an appointment to meet with a fundraiser on their own. And that's what our system helps do, to make sure that the expense of fundraising staff and operations become optimized for the 0.7% that give the 70% of the money.
So there's the efficiency. There is basically you're targeting in different ways to identify people who are more likely to be ready, I guess, to make a donation, and therefore you can be more successful. Now, does this process work across causes? Because we understand that there are some causes for which they lack the popularity or they don't have the immediate emotional pull that some others do. But have you seen this effective with causes maybe that don't get as much attention, or maybe are so somewhat not as prescient, it seems, to people as others?
I would say that just every cause really has its tribe, and some tribes are bigger than others.
Okay.
So yes, it does work for every cause. However, causes that have over-solicited their lists and destroyed the trust, or causes that overwhelm their supporters with transactional offers, like to buy trinkets, to buy t-shirts, to buy Christmas ornaments. If you've really anchored their psychology to this idea that this is a transactional relationship, not a truly heartfelt relational relationship, then it's unlikely to work.
And now it's time for our Giving Tips segment with Bennett Weiner, one of the world's most renowned experts on charity accountability and the COO of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance.
I'd like to talk to you about organizations that address cancer. Certainly, cancer is a type of topic an issue of concern that affects so many households. I believe that the last statistic that I saw was that over 17 million cancer survivors are in the United States. So many people are impacted by this dreadful disease, and there's a lot of public sympathy to support charities that are addressing this. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind that not all organizations that have cancer in its names are affiliated with each other. There are many different types of organizations doing different things. So when you're choosing a particular cancer charity, one, there could be cases of mistaken identity. The cancer charity that you may have in mind may not be the one that's soliciting you. So look at the name of the organization carefully to make sure it's the organization you're thinking about. The other thing is that don't assume what the organization does based solely on its name. A cancer organization could be involved in such things as helping individuals with treatment or some type of direct assistance, as they're trying to get help for cancer. It may be assistance with getting needed medical equipment at home or other types of things that may help them in overcoming their disease. The other thing is research. It's probably one of the most popular types of charities or organizations that are looking into finding different treatments and cures. Obviously, people want to fund that, and that's an area of increasing interest. And then also education awareness is something that some organizations focus on. Helping to educate the public on what types of tests they should get for cancer or what lifestyles they may choose to change in order to avoid certain cancer potential. So when you're looking for an organization that's addressing cancer, keep in mind there are many different issues that they could cover. Check out the charity's website to learn more about them, but also remember to go to give.org to see if the cancer charity that you have in mind meets the 20 BBB charity standards.
So in the case that you've seen, probably not every organization has succeeded. So in the worst case that you've come in contact with, what were some of the things that went wrong?
That's a good question. Even in the worst case, by the way, it still works.
Okay.
You generate leads. It will generate leads. But the one organization that comes to mind, I don't want to name the organization, but their big thing was Christmas ornaments.
Okay.
So most of their database didn't even know there was a charitable component to this organization. So then when they get a survey and they start asking about giving and philanthropy, there's a tremendous disconnect. And it just doesn't make sense to them. They'll answer the survey and it's just they got way less qualified leads because, again, the list has been predisposed to think of the organization not as really a charity through which they can give and find meaning in life, but more so as this is the place where I buy my Christmas ornaments.
Yeah. So how can they change that? How could the organization shift their donor thinking around that?
Anytime, and it's only been a handful of times where we haven't had success, is sadly it's a leadership issue. So, of course, as the leader of a business, I take my role very seriously, and there's a responsibility. Now, if the leadership and the board decide, no, this is the way we're going to go. We're going to live and die by being a transactional marketplace rather than truly a charity. Well, okay, you made that decision, and everything's got to fall in line in your business plan. But you can't make a fish bark. Unless the leader decides we're going to start making fish bark, and then you got to roll up your sleeves. But so what can they do? They need to make a decision at the highest levels that we're going to reposition who we are and start proving to potential supporters that we can be trusted confidently with their money to do the job on their behalf, which is not to buy Christmas ornaments from a foreign country and then ship them,
Well, and I'm just thinking about that organization. I don't know who they are, and we don't need to know, but so they've been successful at some level doing things the way they do it. And you come along with an idea for them to do maybe a lot more, but maybe they feel potentially that there's a risk. So was the alternative that they had to drop what they were doing and pick up this new thing, or could they transition? I mean, what was the feedback you gave?
Yeah, this is what a lot of charities are facing, whether they're as transactional as the one that I was describing. Every charity has a degree of transactionality
Sure.
in them.
Yeah.
Some just more than others.
Right.
Sadly, though, the data is showing that more and more people in America are dropping out of giving altogether.
Absolutely.
So you've seen that data, and 20 years ago it was upwards of 2/3 of Americans gave, and now it's less than 50%.
Right.
So there's I came up with this term, and I wrote a report on it. We do a webinar on it every twice a year. I believe this is what I call fundraising climate change. So this is the slow creeping change in the donor mindset from the silent generation to now the baby boomers, especially, and soon the Gen Xers and millennials. The traditional approaches of over solicitation are driving donors out of giving altogether. Yet the total amount of money given to charity has been still going up pretty much at the rate of the growth in the gross domestic product.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes you scratch your head, say, well, if there's so many fewer donors, how are our charitable giving dollars still kind of going up? And it's because the wealthy have been giving much, much more.
Sure.
However, there's only so much that the wealthy will keep increasing their giving. And what many charities, in fact, right now are finding is that they're reaching a point of diminishing returns where no matter how much more of this expensive junk mail, spam, and all these little widgets and trinkets that they're sold by software providers and such, no matter how much of that they do and invest in, they can't really move the needle that much because they're aimed at low dollar donors that, if you look at all of them, they make up 5 to 10% of all charitable giving dollars. So you need a lot of volume in order to really move the needle.
Yeah.
And that's when people like this group that I was telling you about that was very transactional come to us because they know they have a problem and they're hoping that our system can solve it. We can impart, at least for that one, we did generate the leads for them, but they still didn't have the internal leadership and mindset to understand that, okay, even though we only generated a smaller number of leads compared to all the other charities we work with, you still should go and engage with them because they raise their hands. Well, that's not inculcated among their staff from their leadership to build a relationship with these people, a philanthropic relationship. So they go meet with them and then they ask them for money and then they drive them away and say, your system didn't work. Well, it's not the system didn't work. It's your mindset and the transactional nature of the way you engage and deliver very little value in exchange for money that's not working. So the mindset needs to change at the top.
Mm-hmm. So you're almost ready. What you're basically asking people to do is raise their hand. Your process gets people to raise their hands essentially and say, I'm ready. Come talk to me about a gift, as opposed to, I'm willing to meet with you, ask me for money. And they're not ready. And it just turns out to be a few bucks as opposed to what they could have got.
Yeah.
No, let me ask a slightly different thing. You said something that struck a chord, which is we have a decreasing number of people giving to charitable organizations. And I know my producer over here is probably saying, oh boy, here he goes again. Because I talk about this a lot, that, we have this problem. And in fact, I'm part of the Generosity Commission's organization that's working to try to change this in some way, right? But the real concern, aside from the amount of money that people give at the lower end, let's say, is the lack of connection to philanthropic causes. And there's a sense that when you lose that, somehow our democracy changes because those smaller dollars spread across a broad spectrum of people gave those organizations a sense of independence. And when you shift to receiving money from a small number of wealthier people, you get the money, at least for now, until you do something that, quote, pisses off the wealthy donor, and now you're struggling again. So I think organizations are struggling with that. And I think our society, frankly, is heading towards a crossroads when it comes to this, because we certainly don't want, I don't think, our organizations controlled by the people who donate. We want them to be partners and supporters. But we also want organizations to be able to be governed by boards of directors and led by staff that know the work and focused on accomplishing the objectives in the way that they should be doing. So while I certainly appreciate the power of your ability to help organizations identify wealthy people who raise their hands, is there something we can do, though, in your opinion, or something we should do, to also try to entice and encourage giving from the everyday person who seems to be, as you know, sliding away from giving to organizations?
Yeah, I have very strong opinions about this, Art. So
Okay.
You ready to buckle up?
I am. Let's go.
All right. And we're gonna still be friends after.
No, I hear you. No, that's good. This is good. I love this. All right.
Okay. I think that our society, and especially those who are pondering this question, are making a big mistake by thinking that philanthropy equals money and giving money. Philanthropy, by its definition, it's not an English word. It means for love of humankind.
Yes.
Philanthropy is about love, and love is about engagement. So I always encourage people who are concerned about this, and we have a good reason to be concerned about very few powerful people controlling systems. And that's why we have gift acceptance policies and boards and all that. We don't do away with all that. But financial giving should, in my opinion, should not be the qualifier or quantifier of whether someone's involved and engaged. I think we should start looking at whether people are engaged and monitoring whether people are getting value out of their experience engaging with a cause. And you want me to go? Does that make sense?
No, I'm with you. Yeah, keep going, though. Keep going, because the money is a factor too, but go ahead.
The money is a fact, but what happens is organizations fear this dissolving of the lower dollar donors.
Yeah.
And then they seek to use widgets or tools or tricks or gimmicks to get them to give. And what I'm saying is, don't go after them with a hammer or a spear. Go after them with love, with a spirit of trying to provide them with value in exchange for their money. To the degree that a cause will provide value to charities, and I'm going to give you examples in just a second.
Sure. Okay.
I believe, and I'm the only one who says this, and this is why I don't get invited to the conferences much anymore, but I think we should do away with all of this crass acquisition, solicitation, junk mail spam.
Okay.
I think if most organizations reinvested that money into showing love for supporters, helping them understand the stories of what happens when you give through that organization, people will give on their own. The more you keep socking them in the jaw and demanding that they fork over the money, And as righteous as we may be, well, we've got to encourage more people at the lower levels to, well, the way to do it is not to hit them over the head with more expensive solicitations, whereby only 17% ever give again. And their lifetime giving ends up to be $43 for those lower dollar donors. Why don't you give them the same VIP experience that you give to major donors, which you can do at scale, of course, very biased, but with a system like ours?
Okay.
Give them value and they'll give. Ask them for money, they'll recoil.
Well, listen, I thought you were going to say something that, we were going to have a sharp debate about, but I haven't heard that. So that's kind of...
Well, the reason I don't get invited, though, is because the current system, and I told you, Art, before I got on this podcast, it's my life mission. I made it my mission in 2011. My life purpose, I finally found it at early 40s. It took me that long to figure it out. My life mission is to reduce the friction involved in the philanthropic process, whether it's high dollars or low dollars. If we reduce the friction by providing value, more people will give.
Say more about the friction, though. What do you mean by that? Because some people might not understand what you're talking about.
Sure. Well, I'm a technology guy. I'm a product guy. Everything in my head comes down to friction involved in the process, right? So, for instance, think about this. If I have to put on a different set of running shoes to go exercise, that's friction. I'm not going to exercise or be as likely to go exercise as if I'm already wearing my outfit.
Understood.
Right? So the reason why Amazon is so powerful and became who they became is all because they reduced friction in the process. They even invented a button where you slide it from right to left instead of pressing it, which somehow reduces friction, and they patented it and nobody else can do that, right? Somehow they found that reduced friction. In the philanthropic process, again, for low or high dollar donors, well, let's even just look at a web page. If you go to your favorite charity's webpage, it probably takes exponentially longer to give a donation than it does for you to buy something on Amazon. So there's friction, and that's at the lower levels. If you send them crass solicitations and offer them address labels for free or something, right, that creates friction. If you don't, after they give, if you don't prove to them what you did with the money and make them feel like they have a sense of belonging and you align with their values and you're doing good on their behalf, they're not going to give again. So you've got to reduce all this friction. At the higher levels, there's even more friction because this is a highly considered decision, much like buying a house. If you didn't have Zillow or whatever, it's much easier to buy a house nowadays. But if you encounter a real estate agent who's too busy to drive you around or doesn't give you advice on the schools and such, that's friction that's going to inhibit your decision-making progress.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, we're out of time, but this has been amazing. No, this has been really interesting. And to everyone here, you've been listening to Greg Warner, who is the CEO and founder of MarketSmart. And he's been giving us some really interesting ideas for how we can improve the return on our philanthropic solicitation investment. And so, Greg, I want to thank you for sharing this information. And I'm certain that some listeners will be intrigued enough to reach out to you to find out more. I'm intrigued myself. I want to find out more. We have to figure out how to engage people. And if it's money, great. If it's not money, something else, fine. But there's plenty of opportunities for people to live out their philanthropic hopes through the organizations that exist and that will be coming on the scene. And those organizations have got to figure out how to reach them. And maybe you've hit on something here. You've been doing it for 16 years, and here you are still going. So,
well, all the science and the research proves that I'm right, and the ROI proves I'm right. If we can just get people out of the gravitational pull and the siren song, so to speak, of doing things the way we've always done it,
yeah,
we can make some change.
Well, look, all right. Well, to all of you who are listening to this for the first time, this is the Heart of Giving podcast. And we are a weekly show. So every Tuesday, there's a new episode. I hope you will be a subscriber as a transaction, but I hope you'll also get some value out of it as well from hearing from people like Greg and others who we have on this show. And if you care to support us as an organization and learn more about the work we do, you can go to give.org. Thanks for listening.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.